Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. My name's Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
Good. I'm fresh from the shower. I'm exhilarated from working out. I'm a little rosy in the cheeks for the camera.
Very fitting.
But I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. We're leaving to go camping. Well, I guess I would call it camping.
I would call it cabining.
I don't know. Maybe my family's just weird that they would call going to a cabin camping.
I think we call that being wimps.
But like campsites have, you can get cabins or you can camp.
Right.
So I feel like a campground has cabins on it sometimes.
I think that camping involves a camper or tent, and going to the cabin means using a cabin.
Well, you also think chocolate pie is cake. So anyway, you're taking the lead again tonight.
Uh-huh.
And I have no idea what we're talking about.
Cool. I hope you don't. I feel like you probably got a couple of whiffs of what I was doing, like with listening to my videos I've been watching to research this, but
no, you know me with my ADHD. If I'm not hyper focused on something, it doesn't exist.
Okay.
So.
Well, cool. So tonight we're going to go back in time. We usually do, but we're going to start in the 1920s and we're going to go through the 1950s.
Wow.
And this story takes place in the U.S. To me, when I think of this time period, I think of pretty rough. Like, it was the Great Depression, World War II was going on, things seemed really bleak.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the black and white photos don't really help,
Yeah.
Not being able to see people's colors.
It is interesting how I think Vsauce talked about this, how the media of the time period affects the way we see that time period.
Right, like everybody in pictures looks sad and miserable and gray,
Because they had to sit and wait for the camera to take a picture.
Yeah. Well, not as much as the 1800s, but yeah. So
Yeah.
I just wanted people to remember this time and how bleak it was. And also to remember that there's no internet, so things move a lot differently, different paces. And people didn't have laptops, cell phones. So it's just like a kind of a different world back then. Tonight's case, we're talking about Georgia Tann and Georgia Tann's baby black market. This is a different episode because I am focusing more on the perpetrator than the victim, but I have to get the victim stories out there because we're going to learn that there's way too many, and way too many have lost their names in this process, that I can't really focus on one person to tell a story of who was affected by Georgia. So, Georgia Tann operated the largest black market for children in the U.S., the largest one that the U.S. had ever seen for its time. I can honestly say that I've never heard of this woman before, and it's crazy to me because, she changed history. Yeah.
It sounds like a drink.
Georgia
like
Tann.
A black and tan.
It sounds like a whiskey brand or something. So, and I also have a hard time pronouncing her actual first name. Her born name is Beulah Georgia Tann. She was born on July 18th, 1891 in Philadelphia, Mississippi. She came from a well-off family. Her father was a very well-known judge, and her mother was a classic Southern belle. Her parents' names were Judge George Clark Tann and Beulah Yates Tann.
So her mom's name was Beulah too? Mm-hmm. Reminds me of Flula. I wonder if they have German roots.
I think that's how you say it. It's Beulah.
Oh, Beulah.
Oh, good. So I'm right. Beulah.
Or Beulah.
Close enough.
Close enough, yep. I thought you said Beulah.
Beulah.
Like Flula.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Georgia had one brother. His name is Rob Roy Tann. He was 3 years older than her, though different sources will say that she was 3 years older than him. There is a rumor going on that Rob Roy was adopted, but there is no certainty here. A lot of these facts are a little muddy because this was such a long time ago. We don't know much about their relationship growing up, but Rob eventually would go to World War I and suffer from shell shock syndrome for the rest of his life. Ugh. Until he died at age 46 of tuberculosis.
Sad.
Judge George was the most educated man in Newton County and judge of the Mississippi Secondary Chancery District Court. So one of his responsibilities was dealing with homelessness, homeless children who were wards of the state. Georgia really had a love-hate relationship with her dad. She craved his validation and tried to prove herself constantly to him, but it was hard because George was not a popular judge in the community. He was well respected, but he was also known for being arrogant, argumentative, and a domineering womanizer, quote unquote. So
Yikes.
she really wasn't vibing with him.
Right.
From an early age, Georgia felt like a disappointment to her family. She was not the Southern Belle daughter that her mother had hoped she would be. She was big-boned, broad-shouldered. She preferred flannels and trousers to the frilly long dresses that were popular in the times. So really a little rebellious, because that was very frowned upon for that time period.
Interesting.
Georgia also suffered from a very unattractive limp due to a car accident, just taking more femininity away from her and moving her away from being that Southern Belle her mom hoped she would be. Her father insisted that Georgia play piano. He had her start lessons at age 5, hoping that she would eventually become a concert pianist. She played and practiced until college, but she loathed every minute of it.
It's interesting. So far, it seems like her parents had a lot of ideas for what they wanted her to be. Mm-hmm. And, like, we're kind of pushing her to that instead of trying to figure out who she was.
Right.
You know?
What she wanted was to ditch piano playing and try her own hand at the law, like her father. But
Nice.
her dad would not allow this and said that it was not proper for a lady, a proper woman, to have that career path.
Yikes.
So, absolutely not. Georgia enjoyed helping out with local charities, but not really because she found it warm and fuzzies. She wanted to avoid doing activities with her peers because she just didn't fit in. So she really found it as a place of refuge. Instead of going to parties or dances, she would be found like sweeping floors at local charity events. After finishing high school, Georgia went on to study music, graduating from the Martha Washington College in Virginia in 1913. She also studied social work at Columbia University for 2 summers. She tried working as a teacher in Columbus, Mississippi in 1916, but soon discovered that she lacked the patience for teaching and also considered it to be an old-fashioned career.
Seems like a career that would never be old-fashioned. What a different time.
Mm-hmm. Like, teaching was one of the only proper careers for women back then, I guess. So I think she just found it old-fashioned because she wanted to be something different and
Yeah.
breakthrough career.
Oh, gotcha.
As a young woman, Georgia started developing her own theories on society. She didn't become obsessed, but really looked up to Hitler in Nazi Germany. And she started thinking about eugenics and thinking that that was the way to go. And she also started describing wealthy people as of the higher type.
Wait, is Georgia going to be the bad guy? No.
Well, can you maybe...
Well, you just said she
figure
looked
that?
up to Hitler, so...
Yeah. So she would consider like poverty-stricken women that were left over from the Depression as breeders, or referring to them as cows. And she argued that poor people were incapable of proper parenting.
It sounds like Handmaid's Tale.
She just,
A little
she totally felt like there were 2 classes. There were rich people that were supposed to live the life, and then there were poor people that should serve rich people. And that was pretty much it.
This is what she believed?
Yeah, and she was basing these beliefs off of different Hitler theories. And then also was super into the idea of eugenics.
All right.
So that's the practice of improving human species by selectively mating different people with desirable traits and then reducing or breeding out disabilities and so-called undesirable traits. Another idea that at first I was like, well, if you can get disease out of the human race, that's cool. But then I realized Hitler was talking about a lot of other things too.
Well, it's like Thanos. Like, even if someone has good intentions behind their actions, the execution is the most important part. And obviously, if the execution is just plain evil, then
Yeah.
that ruins any good intentions behind it.
Right. So that's where George is at in her young womanhood. In 1922, Georgia Tann started her social work career. She started at the Mississippi Children's Home Society as a field agent. Her career was short-lived here due to her being fired for, quote, dubious child placing practices. So records don't really go into the details of what these practices were, but Georgia may have gotten a taste for the power working in the field as an agent that she would later wield over these families. She began placing poor children in adoptive homes without the consent of their parents and didn't care about the backgrounds of the new adoptive homes they would be going into. One of Georgia's first victims was named Rose Harvey. And this was in the spring of 1922. Georgia had driven her Ford Model T to Jasper County, Mississippi, to the small cabin that Rose lived in. She was pregnant at the time, she was poor, she was a widow, and she was also suffering from diabetes. Rose had a 2-year-old son named Onyx. She was resting inside the cabin while Onyx was playing by himself on the back porch. Georgia pulled up in her Ford Model T, pressuring Onyx to come inside the car with her. Now, the moment the 2-year-old got into the car, she just fled. Georgia had her father sign legal documents declaring that Rose Harvey was an unfit mother, and then the son was given up for adoption.
She had her father the judge to it? Mm-hmm. So, abusing his power, and he went along with this?
Oh, there's a lot of people that are going to go along with this.
Okay.
So, Rose Harvey obviously tried to get her son back. She hired a lawyer, but she was never able to get custody of her son again. Just for this weird couple of hour window, her son was just stolen and never came back.
Yikes.
1922 also marked the year that Georgia adopted her own daughter named June. This is kind of crazy side story here. Anne Atwood was one of Georgia's best friends and a rumored lover who took on the role as house mother to June, which was Georgia's adoptive daughter. Mm-hmm. Anne was 8 years older than Georgia and had a son of her own.
Okay.
So this is 1922. I think this was probably super risque for the time. And they just had like this like makeshift family.
Well, I suppose like at the time they didn't sell it like it was a relationship.
Right.
Like the relationship was a rumor.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like just two mothers sharing, living expenses or something.
But Georgia was like super rebellious to even be able to adopt a daughter without being married or anything for the 1920s.
Oh, really? Weird.
I don't know how this would happen, but it did.
It's crazy how much time has changed.
You know what I think that was a big deal back then.
Yeah.
So in 1924, we're going 2 years later, with Anne Atwood and the help of her father's powerful connections, Georgia uprooted to Tennessee. She became executive secretary at the Shelby branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society there. So remember, before she was working at the Mississippi Children's Home Society and got fired. Now she's working at the Tennessee Children's Home Society.
Just real quick, something to keep in mind as we go on. Like, I don't know what she's going to do, but it sounds like a really, really difficult, frustrating time to be a woman. Like, being told you can't do all these things. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm. No, it's okay. So while she started this job of being the executive secretary of the society, she started her business of stealing children and selling them on the side. At this time...
What?
Yeah. When she stole Onyx from Rose.
So she's turning this into a regular thing?
She's turning this into a huge business. At this time, adoption was not popular in the U.S., and it wasn't well known or very lucrative. You could actually adopt a baby for $7 back then, which is roughly $100 in today's money.
So it's like adopting a cat?
Yeah.
Okay, back to Onyx real quick. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you mentioned this. What were his parents doing?
His mother was a widow, and she was taking a rest inside the cabin.
So she just took advantage of that situation and moved to a different state?
I think it was like her testing the waters.
Seeing
And
what she could get
also,
away with.
she like had an up working at the other society with maybe a lead of, hey, can you check on this mother and see how she's doing? And then, yeah.
It's a scary time to live in because they didn't have, like we talked about at the beginning, no internet.
Right.
There was no database. Law enforcement agencies didn't communicate, across states.
That's what I want our listeners to keep on remembering. So,
just completely different time.
If this was today, then, it would just be so different.
Yeah. Wouldn't last very long.
But like I was saying, because adoption wasn't well known, and you could adopt a child for so little money, Georgia decided that she needed to advertise adoption as something, more exciting, more accepted in society, making it more glamorous for people, and also charging higher prices.
Well, I mean, it should be acceptable because if there's a kid that needs a home, they deserve one.
Totally. So she started making these advertisements, putting them in the paper. And these ads are wild. One is a picture of 3 children smiling up at the camera with the slogan, "We want to be your Christmas present." Another is a baby girl that says, "Nancy, just 11 months old, needs a home. How can you say no?" Like, kind of bizarre.
Well, it's very tug at your heartstrings,
especially
but also manipulative.
The Christmas present one, like, that's what you do for a puppy, or I don't know.
Well, it reminds me of those commercials with all the sad animals and the Sarah McLachlan music.
She also gave lectures on adoption, arguing that adopted children, quote, turn out better than birth children, saying, this is another quote, "Ours is a selective process. We select the child and we select the home." Georgia even made baby catalogs around Christmas time and had a raffle called the Christmas Baby Giveaway. She would give away 20 to 30 children once a year for the price of an admission ticket.
Having different classes of children or selecting like prime children, that defeats the whole purpose of adoption. Like, every child deserves a home. That's disgusting to like select good children and have undesirable children.
That's how it ties in with her eugenics theory, as she was trying to push that, saying that this was like a purebred child, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Adoptions over state lines became a real hot way for Georgia to make money. She was selling 90% of the children she stole in New York or LA for agencies to up to $5,000. And that would be $70,000 in today's money.
And she was just getting all these children by like luring them the way she did with...
So we are going to talk about that now that you are thoroughly confused.
Yeah.
Georgia had a lot of powerful people in her grip. She was under the protection of E.H. or Edward Hull Crump. And he was a corrupt... I know, right? And this, like, so skeevy. Crump.
Isn't there, like, a serial killer with that last name? Something like it?
I don't know. He was a corrupt, obviously, and powerful mayor of Memphis who would eventually help her get her own orphanage and even steal children from time to time.
Yes.
His nickname was Boss Crump, and he was known as the Boss of Memphis.
Okay. Okay.
So with the protection of this mayor, whom she paid off handsomely, and also he had a really weird patronage to her. I don't know if he had a crush on her or like what the heck. Maybe she had some really bad blackmail on him.
That's really ironic because before you said when she was a kid, she was described as undesirable, like with her limp and her looks and stuff by her parents. You'd think someone like that would feel pity for the children she's filtering out. And that's another sign of the times that we're talking about, is that the mayor would be able to do something like this and keep it under wraps. Although, I mean, a lot of people in power find ways to get away with stuff now. That
we'll see that here too.
Oh, really? Okay.
She also had connections with her father, whom I don't know how big of a part he played but she definitely had him in her pocket. She had the help of her lover, Anne Atwood, who would help ferry stolen children around the country as far as from their birth parents as possible. And she also had Camille Kelly. Camille Kelly was very useful for her. She was a juvenile court judge in Memphis. So she had the power to remove parental rights, like with writing something, I can't say this, with a swift move of her pen, I'll say.
Basically the power to sign people's lives away.
Right. And change things and then hand children to Georgia with little to no questions under the guise of doing what she felt was right for these children. Georgia, she felt invincible. Like, she must have had this crazy way of talking to people, manipulating them and keeping them in her grasp. Crump would take a lot of heat for her. He protected her from a lot of investigations that started from these frantic families, but they were just nipped, like, right in the bud. Like, I don't know what he told these people, but it just stopped.
Maybe the people investigating him were, usually their investigators are lower tier than judges, so he probably...
Well, and he was the mayor, so...
Oh, I was thinking of her dad. Okay. So she had a mayor and a judge.
She had Kelly, who was the juvenile court judge. She had Crump, who was the corrupt mayor. And she had her dad. He was a judge, but I don't think he was quite as involved as the other two. Georgia Tann stole and sold around 5,000 children between 48 states in the U.S. She made an estimated $1 million, or in today's money, $11 million. Around 600 of these children died in the care of the Tennessee Children's Home Society.
What?
The children who weren't adopted right away were housed here in terrible conditions. They suffered from neglect, lack of food, lack of affection. If a child had a birth defect, health problems, or was sickly, Georgia would send the child away and it would never be seen again.
Oh my God. So she didn't adopt people based on demand? She didn't steal kids based on demand. She literally just stole as many kids as possible. And if she couldn't find a buyer, she would just dump them off.
Right. The society she worked for was a orphanage, right? She had her own orphanage. So if that orphanage got too full, then she would loan children out to other orphanages that were around her.
Or if they had defects, she would, sounds like, dispose of them somehow.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of that, one reporter claims to have seen one of the workers at the orphanage burying a body in the garden in the backyard. I don't know how true that is. It could have been just a rumor. One doctor reported that he told Georgia to stop bringing in so many children at once, so the orphanage couldn't keep up and dozens of kids would die in the same small period of time because of disease.
Oh my God.
Babies were kept in dirty rooms that had suffocating heat. Some of them were sedated until they could be adopted out. Other children were sexually assaulted. Georgia herself assaulted some of the girls, and the male caretakers were known to have their way with other children in the orphanage.
Dude, this is huge. Like, so many lives being either taken or ruined by this person.
I think so far about all these conditions, what shocks me the most is having the babies sedated until they're adopted. Like, how messed up is that?
Yeah, when they're supposed to be developing.
Shot after shot after shot.
That completely stunts their development. Because their body isn't supposed to be sedated while they're growing.
Right. Children that made it, that weren't adopted out, but also didn't have any defects or anything, were used as free labor.
Laborers?
Yeah, free labor. She would use them until they were adults practically, although most were adopted out. So now we're going to talk about two victims. These two were twin brothers, James and Thomas White. I actually got this information from their interview with Oprah from 1991.
Oh, I remember you watching that. Okay.
And like, they were the sweetest old guys, and just think they were really nervous to be on TV. So this is what I could gather from their story, because it was a bit choppy, and Oprah was also like pushing for more information. I don't know. It was weird. Oprah's been proved since 1991.
No, this is 1991.
Yeah.
Wow. So the year I was born.
Yeah. So they're like fully grown adults trying to recall what happened. But they were stolen at the age of 5. They recalled 2 people coming into their house while they were napping. These people took them from their beds.
5? Mm-hmm. So at this point, they knew their parents.
Right. Totally.
They knew they were being kidnapped. Mm-hmm. How does someone get away with this?
James and Thomas's sister, who was supposed to be watching them and 13, had left the house to go down the street to visit Grandma.
Which seems harmless. You're like, they take a nap every day, it'll be fine.
I just feel so bad because she must have felt just so guilty.
How old? 13? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the age where
you feel stuff like that.
Plenty old enough to let it sink in. Ugh.
Once James and Thomas were taken from the home, they were brought directly to the Tennessee Children's Home. They don't remember how long they were kept there, but they say it could have been months and months. They were paraded around by Georgia Tann herself to multiple potential buyers, and they were eventually sold off to a rich couple in California. At age 7, they ran away from this couple because they were abusing them. They remember being beaten with a cord from one of the hot irons, like an ironing board. They remember their adoptive parents also throwing huge parties that would quickly get out of hand, and it would scare them. One night they got tired of the situation. They ran away, and they hid in their neighbor's empty swimming pool. The neighbor found the boys, noticed all the marks and bruises that they had on their bodies, and called the police. Once the police were called, James and Thomas were taken away from the couple, which is good, but they were brought right back to Georgia Tann.
Are you kidding me?
So this is when their personal story of sexual abuse began. They remember laying on the floor with blankets, with other children laying naked next to them. They remember kids crying and screaming and being yelled at to shut up by the adults. Grown adults would put the children on beds naked and instruct them to hug and kiss each other while others watched. They also remember that every Sunday would be showtime, and it was time to get dressed up and be paraded around so other people, potential buyers, would see them and see if they were interested in those boys or not. The twins were adopted out again. It seemed like they were adopted out several times, but eventually they were adopted out by a pretty nice lady with gray hair who they remember being quite happy with.
Like
for
their
most
mom,
part.
pretty much.
So isn't that just like Georgia Tann made money off of them multiple times whenever an adoptive parent would get in trouble?
Can't believe the police took them and brought them right back to this woman who's stolen so many children and somehow never gotten caught. Mm-hmm. And did they ever reunite with their real, birth parents?
Mm-mm. No. So let's talk about Georgia now. She was such a snake, obviously. She pretended to be maternal and helpful to these potential clients while not caring for these children at all, just viewing them as paychecks. She would tell buyers lies about these children constantly, making up backgrounds for them as she saw fit that would entice the buyer. Not that she'd be able to remember any of these children's backgrounds anyway.
Right? You said 5,000?
5,000, yep.
Dude, she's you said she looked up to Hitler. She's like a miniature Hitler. With all these lives she's destroyed.
And this is crazy too. Families who adopted children from Tann, they are, not this part, they are not to be blamed for getting into this scheme. I want to make it clear that most of these people had no reason to believe that this was shady, because to the public, Tann was doing the kindest of trades, and on its face, she was operating a completely legitimate adoption agency. To sweeten the deal, Tann pretty much always had the same story for couples. The children came from beautiful mothers very attractive fathers who were doctors, and for some tragic reason, the family had to give up their beloved child. So once they were paid for, Georgia still wasn't through with the child and the adoptive parents. She was known to blackmail her clients, coming up with reasons why she needed more money, whether it be for legal fees or the birth mother wanted the child back.
Oh my gosh.
Or fees that she had previously forgotten about.
And it's all made up just to make more money.
Yeah. She'd be like, oh, I forgot to tell you that he needed a surgery while he was in my care. Or the birth
After it's a done deal.
Yeah. Nursing fees, traveling fees, all sorts of stuff. And also, if the parents did start to wonder what was going on, or they felt like something wasn't right, they had concerns about their child's upbringing, their past, or the child maybe told them something about their lives, it was silenced in a matter of moments. Georgia would threaten them, bringing in Judge Kelly, that juvenile court judge, saying that she would use legal action to take back the child if necessary.
That's terrifying. And especially when you bring a judge to someone and threaten them like that. Because it's expensive to get your own legal representation in this situation.
And when you're paying for all the fees that Georgia keeps bringing up. So now let's talk about her methods of how she would take all these children. Remember, we talked about Rose Harvey, one of Georgia's first victims, and she lured Rose's son into her car. Well, this is one of the tactics that she would use quite frequently. She'd drive up to houses in her fancy black car and offer kids free rides, candy, or whatever. She always targeted poor communities, shanty houses, didn't touch the rich. Because Tann had these connections with doctors and nurses, she also got a lot of newborn babies. Medical staff would deliver the babies and then take them away as soon as they were born. They would tell the mothers that the babies were stillborn and had already been disposed of.
She had medical staff working for her too?
Mm-hmm. Yep, she would pay them off. And once they handed the newborns to Georgia, they were given a cut of the profits.
Oh.
Sometimes Georgia would go to the hospital, all dressed up in her social worker uniform and chat with these unfortunate mothers while they were still drowsy and incoherent from sedatives. She would have them sign paperwork saying that it was just some normal hospital documents, when really, the mothers were signing away their parental rights. Georgia would take the babies from prisons, mental wards, any way she could. She even got so bold that she would drive up to public parks or churches and even daycares and would have kids hop in when they were playing on the playground. Isn't that wild? She did have some minions, her employees disguised as social workers too, that would do the same thing.
That's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Posing as someone trustworthy.
Yeah.
And somehow she pulled the wool over the eyes of so many people. And then other people willingly worked for her. Like, what the heck?
Like I said before, she targeted white children from poor families. She believed that they would be the easiest because they lacked the resources to find their missing kids. And she even said they wouldn't notice a child missing because she was actually doing them a favor. Once Georgia had the children in her care, she would strip them of their identity, falsify new documents, and give them to potential buyers. So to me, I think that Georgia, she just reminds me of like a head mafia. Like she's just like the top dog of this huge pyramid scheme. She has so many people working under her: political figures, nurses, doctors, social workers, police officers, judges. They all got a piece of the pie. They were all compliant, and it seemed to work seamlessly. I don't understand how this happened from 1922 to 1950. It's crazy.
Yeah. And she made millions in the process.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about Peggy, this is a hard last name for me, Konitzer. And this is it's a little transcript from a website of an author who's trying to, advertise her book. And we're going to talk about those books in the end because I think that they're super helpful. I just got one. It just came in the mail. So this is for everybody. This Peggy's mom was a victim of Georgia Tann. So this is in Peggy's words. She said, "My mother was one of 7 siblings. She lived with her mom and dad in a little shack alongside the Mississippi River. They were very poor, and my mother was 8 years old at the time when a limousine pulled up. The children were playing outside. They were outside, all 6 of them, and the limousine pulled up and somehow lured them into the car and took them to the orphanage. There, they were separated from all their siblings and were adopted out across the country. My mother and her twin sister were taken to Philadelphia and adopted to a very nice couple in Philadelphia. And as soon as they got off the train, they were told, 'We're your new mommy and daddy.' My mother said, 'No, you're not. I have a mommy and daddy.' My mother and her twin were 8 years old at the time, and Georgia Tann told their adoptive parents that they were 6 years old. So just imagine being 8 years old and then being told, 'No, you're 6 years old. And now you have a new mommy and daddy.' So my mother never got over the trauma of being taken from her parents, of being separated from her siblings. She never forgot them. She always longed for her biological family. She never accepted the fact that she was now a part of another family. She lived a very sad life, even though she went on to have 5 children of her own. She was a very unhappy person, and she could never get over the trauma of being taken from her parents and thrown into another situation, which was not her choice at all."
And this was just one person.
Just a small snippet
I
of
guess
her
2
story.
people. It was like her and her sister,
Her
right?
twin, yeah.
But, I mean, this is probably an example of what happened to a lot of people. And 8 years old? Like, you're plenty old enough to know what's going on.
Totally.
Like, how stupid did Georgia Tann think these kids were?
Well, I think she must have done a lot of manipulating, a lot of your parents don't care about you anymore. They wanted me to take you.
And again, back to the time period, I think it was a time when no one had any respect for children or what they had to say,
Or less than today, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if women were treated so differently, children must have been too. I don't know.
All right. So are you ready to hear about the downfall of Georgia Tann?
Yes.
Finally?
Please.
Well, in the mid-1940s, Georgia Tann found out that she had uterine cancer. Though this didn't stop her from her business by any means, it did slow her down a little bit.
Whoa.
Things...
Like, if karma's a real thing.
Yeah, right? That's what, every article on the internet said when it says that.
Yeah, it's the natural response, I think.
Yeah. Things were starting to go sour between her and her most powerful ally, Mayor Crump. In 1949, Crump's enemy, Gordon Browning, was elected mayor. Now, this was not good for Crump. He had been the boss of Memphis forever. And Browning wanted any type of dirt on this guy. So Browning caught wind about Tann's baby black market and Crump's involvement in it. So while Tann's health started to steeply decline, Browning had a private investigator look into the case. The investigator came back with a lot of information. The governor of Tennessee revealed at a huge press conference that Tann was not who she claimed to be.
Wow.
Now, they weren't really focused about the children. They were really focused on the illegal profits that she made while receiving state funds.
So this was all a political move.
Yeah.
It's good that they got it out.
But it's so stupid.
Especially, they got it out in a public setting.
Yeah.
So no one, people would know about it. It couldn't be covered up by anyone. But still, the fact that it was motivated by politics.
And it wasn't even about Tann. He didn't really care. He just wanted
people to know that Mayor Crump was involved in it.
Yeah. And he probably didn't know the scope, but still.
So in other words, times haven't changed that much.
So,
jeez.
By this time, Georgia Tann was too sick with her cancer. She wasn't getting any treatment. She couldn't answer any of the questions from the press conference. And very disappointingly, 3 days After this conference, she slipped into a coma and died peacefully in her bed from the untreated uterine cancer at 4:20 a.m. on September 15th, 1950, at the age of 59.
You gotta be kidding me.
So she never had to go to court. She never got prosecuted. All she gets now is a bad reputation that you can barely find online.
I almost wonder if this all coming out, like the stress and anxiety of that, like, made,
It's
exacerbated her cancer.
The anniversary of her death tomorrow.
Huh. Well,
Okay.
that sucks that none of these people got justice. I mean, again, like Hitler.
Yeah.
Never was tried for his crimes, just boom, took his life, gone.
2 months later, after she died, the Tennessee Children's Home Society closed its doors for good. Juvenile court Judge Kelly retired early and died in 1955 by a stroke. She was never prosecuted and completely safe under the protection of Crump's powerful connections. Crump died a year later after Judge Kelly and was honored, having a boulevard named after him in Memphis from Route 55 to Route 78. Nobody was prosecuted. It really seemed like the government was trying to protect the higher-ups in the society and didn't care about this disgusting scheme, even though a press conference came up.
This is why I never, look down on people who believe in conspiracy theories, because this was a mayor. Was it Memphis? Mm-hmm. A mayor of Memphis, not even 70 years ago, was involved in this. It's just
and still
disgusting.
No one was prosecuted after it came out. That's what I don't understand, how that happened with all the information we have now. I mean, it's still hard to find, but I found it.
Yeah. Well, look how much information's come out about Epstein and all the stuff around him, and we're still waiting for something to happen.
Yeah. I mean, thousands of families were torn apart by Georgia Tann and her minions. Parents never saw their children again. Siblings were forced to be separated for life. And now get this, the adoption records were sealed. Some states were finally able to open them in the 90s. Adopted children were barred from learning the identities of their birth parents. The only way that you could maybe get your birth records were if you had a special court order and paid a hefty fine. I just don't get it. I think the most terrifying aspect of this story is how long it went on for, how many people were in on it, and how many people just turned away and didn't care.
That's scary. I mean, that's the way it goes. The few people in power control the narrative, they control what happens, and if the media sells it, people buy it.
Yeah, well then, and again, for the government
without looking into it.
By the way, you still can't know who your birth parents are.
Yeah, and how hard it was for you to dig up this information.
Yeah.
Ozzy Osbourne says. I just
feel like this should be in the U.S. history books. This was so huge.
Yeah, this was
so huge. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm wrong.
Especially with the kids who disappeared mysteriously and were never heard from again.
Yeah.
And all of the kidnappings, 5,000 kidnappings. Mm-hmm. She would have had so many lifetimes of prison if she was a normal person. It's just disgusting.
I would hope she would get thousands of years. The
different class systems that, technically don't exist, but they actually still do.
Mm-hmm. See here, I want to go back to what I was doing. I was just trying to find, there's actually quite a list of famous people that came out of these adoptions.
Oh.
Joan Crawford's daughters. She had 2 twin girls that were adopted out. And I'm really, really hoping to make a Patreon episode about her daughter, Christina, who wrote a book, Mommy Dearest, and then that was turned into a movie about her experiences with her adoptive mom, Joan Crawford, and how terrible it was.
Really?
There's also a big U.S. world wrestler guy that was from this operation, and a couple of others. But
so did Joan Crawford know about Georgia Tann?
no, like a lot of
It was just
a lot of famous people adopted children from her.
Well, yeah, because she sold it as this elite adoption agency. So of course, people who view themselves as the elite would want to adopt from her.
And even Eleanor Roosevelt, the favorite first lady, they had a like a public chat with her about how amazing she was and how she was doing God's work, and it was just really weird, and asked advice from Georgia Tann.
Wow.
So anyways, I don't want to forget about the books. These incredible books, they're called Before and After and Before I Was Yours by Lisa Lingate and Judy Christie. Before and After is real life stories of orphans who survived Tennessee Children's Home Society. It's 15 different survivors who talk about what it was like and how they made it out. And then Before I Was Yours is just by Lisa Lingate, and this is a fictionalized account through the eyes of a young girl, I believe, that went into the system.
Okay.
So make sure you check those out. I just got one of them from Amazon. I ordered both. I don't know which one I got yet.
Oh, is that it?
That's it for this.
Thank you, Rosie. I can't believe that we'd never heard of this before.
I know.
It seems like it should be a huge story.
And the only reason I did find out is because I was in a YouTube rabbit hole one night. You know how that goes.
Oh, yeah. That's where you get your news now.
Yeah. So, hope you guys learned something. I did too. I also want to put a disclaimer that there are so many different conflicting dates and facts. I just did the best I could. So,
well, I'm sure a lot of people didn't want this story to get out, or if they fudge up the details between sources, it sounds like it's, well, maybe this isn't true.
I mean, I think I got a pretty good outline here, but like Rob, the brother, I couldn't tell you 100% if it was 3 years younger or older at this point, but I'm pretty sure it was younger. Anyway.
All right. Well, that's sad, and it's sad to see all the parallels between then and now. I mean, obviously times have changed a lot when it comes to certain aspects, but in other ways, the corrupt lifestyles of people in power and the way they're able to cover them up and get rich, and it's
disgusting, and it's scary.
I can't believe no big media agencies reported on this at the time, and not that I'm surprised, but yikes. All right, well, thank you, Rosie.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Guess that's where we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
And go record our Patreon episode.
Yes.
Do you want to give a little preview? Or
Yes. I shared a couple weeks ago that I went to the Vincent van Gogh exhibit. It's been a big deal here in the States. And it was super cool, and it sparked this love affair that I never knew I had for Vincent. So I did a deep dive into his life and found it super interesting and decided to write an episode about it because of how misunderstood and how tragic his life is. So if you guys want to check it out, it will be up in Patreon.
Yeah. So we want to say thank you so much to all of our patrons. We really appreciate you. Let me check. I think we might have some shout outs to do.
Oh, really?
Oh, and I also was going to read a follow-up from last week that information someone sent us over on Instagram.
Okay.
So I want to say thank you to Crazy Caitlin, one of our newest patrons.
Thank you.
Also, Lizzie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Glad you're enjoying the premium episodes.
Yeah. It's always nice to hear.
And also Susan, thank you so much. Sorry it took so long to get to your shout out. Obviously our recording schedule has been rocky this past summer, and we're still getting into the swing of it again. Getting used to this.
So we're going to be way more on the ball.
Yeah. And we also just wanted to give a quick follow-up to last week when we were talking about Amanda Todd. One of our listeners, Anastasia, reached out to us and wanted to share some information about suicide because that came up in the Amanda Todd case. And she said when someone's very deep in depression, they may struggle to come up with a plan and carry it out. However, when they start improving, they're often more able to act on suicidal ideation. So this is part of the reason that it's important to keep asking someone struggling whether they're having thoughts of suicide, because, you know, as they're showing signs of improving, they're also becoming more likely to be able to act on their desires, and if one of their desires is suicide, then...
Very interesting.
So thank you for reaching out with that, Anastasia.
Yes, thank you.
It's a really scary thought.
It is.
Because you'd think that once they're showing signs of improvement,
you're
like, okay.
We got things under control.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all for listening. We appreciate you.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Hope you're enjoying our new format on YouTube. If you're watching, I think that's all we got to say.
I think so.
So,
yeah.
Talk to you next time.
All right. Bye, guys.